Good afternoon, everyone. It's Nigel at Citation. Hope you're well. Thank you for joining this NDNA regional meeting. I hope you find it very useful. As always, you know of Citation. For those who don't, employment law, health and safety, cyber security, DBS checks, e-learning, etc., etc. We've got a lot to talk about this afternoon in our talk with my colleagues. There's a lot of stuff on employment law that you need to know about, lots of changes. Happy to have a chat with anyone after the event. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michelle from Hope. I hope you're all well and looking forward to the knowledge and insight that's about to be shared. I'm sure it will be invaluable. At Hope, we think the job you do is the most important on earth, nurturing, caring for and inspiring our youngest generation. And for that, we want to say thank you and support you all we can. As the NDNA's corporate partner, Hope are delighted to offer fantastic member benefits when you shop with us. Did you know that you get 15% off every order you place with us throughout the year, and also a one-off 20% discount to be used once in the year, perhaps on one of the larger orders so that you make the most of the savings? We understand budgets are tight, so we've put together a list of over 200 essential items with savings of up to 70%, including art and craft essentials, stationery supplies, cleaning, nappies and play sand. And you won't have to wait for your order because we offer you free next day delivery on all orders with no minimum spend. So if you've not signed up already, it's really easy to do. Just go to our website www.hope-education.co.uk/NDNA. Thanks very much for your time.
Hundreds of thousands of children have been exposed to symbols over the past 40 years. We are the market leader and very good at what we do, working with over 10,000 primary schools and an increasing number of preschool settings. As well as being able to create your own resources, Widget Online contains a comprehensive early years pack that covers the 7 main areas of learning from the early years foundation stage statutory framework. Please pop along to our virtual space later to find out more.
CPOM Student Safe, promoting the comprehensive safety of every young person. We're the #1 market-leading solution used in over 19,000 establishments for tracking safeguarding, and we're pleased to announce our nursery pricing, which will cover up to 100 young people for £495 plus VAT, with a further 5% discount for NDNA members.
Explore membership with the Institute of Early Years Education today. Enhance your well-being and flourish with a 24/7 GP, digital gym and discount and rewards hub. Learn and improve professional practice with our member resources. Explore career options and plan with our career-focused resources. Experience unity and belonging in our forum and live events. Review and reflect on your achievements with a CPD tracker and reflective log. Join the Institute and achieve more with us.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome. Thank you to everyone for joining us today at the NDNATalk Virtual England member event. I'm Glenn Rothwell. I'm the Membership Services Manager at NDNA. I'm delighted to welcome you today, and I'll be your host. The event is being recorded. You'll be able to watch it on our website after the event, and you'll also be able to see the speaker slides from today's presentations. I'd like to say a big thank you to today's sponsors, HR Employment Law and Health and Safety expert Citation. And we do have a number of exhibitors with us today, offering a range of products and services that you may be interested in. Earlier in the week, we sent an email to delegates inviting you to enter the exhibitor prize draw, and we will be revealing the winners later on. So good luck to everyone that entered. You will have a chance today to ask questions of each speaker straight after their presentation. Two of our exhibitors, Hope and Widget, aren't live with us today at the event. If you have questions for them after watching their video, please message us in the chat and we'll take your details to pass on to them. To ask a question of the speaker or NDNA staff, please use the Q&A function, which you should find at the bottom of your screen, and we will aim to ask your question at the end of the session. You can, in the meantime, chat with our sponsors and exhibitors using the chat function throughout the event. And again, you can find that button at the bottom of your screen. So just to go over the communication channels again, please use the Q&A function to ask questions of the speakers or NDNA staff, and please use the chat button for communicating with the exhibitors. So I do hope that you enjoy today's event. And Purnima, if you are ready, I will hand over to you for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I know it's been a busy time for you, and thank you for joining us, and also welcome to some of our new members who've joined as well. And autumn already, this is our autumn member event, so can't believe that we're already into October. But as you know, since the election, lots of changes, lots of new announcements. And I just want to give you a quick update because, as you know, we have got two deputy directors from DfE, Mike Davies and Suzanne Taylor, who will be joining us to give you a more detailed presentations on all the changes and the new developments. And also Ofsted are going to join us. Jayne and Wendy Ratcliffe will be here a bit later. But what I will do is just give you a quick rundown in terms of what's been happening. Fresh from the Labour Party conference, I was there for 3 days in Liverpool, and just give you a quick update of what's going on at the moment. In terms of the economy, you know, the inflation has not really gone down that much. In fact, there's been a little increase. But as you can see, the unemployment figures are still around 4.2%, and vacancies are down. But I know you're all still struggling to recruit staff, but that's been a kind of a, you know, very mixed picture across England and across UK as well. And living wage is up by 9.8%, but at the same time, your wage bill has gone up 14.4%. And of course, the funding from 25-26, this is what previous government announced as well, and this current government will be committed to that, is it will be linked to inflation and wage growth moving forward. And as you know, since the elections, we had lots of announcements, and we got the Chancellor and the Prime Minister are already warning us in terms of the shortfalls and in terms of what they inherited from the previous government. So we're looking at the moment £22 billion shortfall. And of course, what that means for public finances, not just for this year, but moving forward, we'll need to see what the budget is going to tell us in October. And the 30th of October is the budget date. And already 5.5 billion cuts announced, and of course some big projects have been scrapped, and social care reform, winter fuel allowance has been cut. There was a lot of protest at the Labour Party conference particularly about the winter fuel allowance cuts. And tax increases already have been highlighted by both the Chancellor and the Prime Minister. And 30th of October is when the budget is going to be announced. Now, what is happening is there will be a 1-year spending review, and then there will be a 3-year comprehensive spending review, which will be next year, April 2025. And of course, you know, one of the things that we have been kind of, talking to the current ministers who were also the shadow ministers previously. And I think the important issue is the funding, not only the hourly rates for 3- and 4-year-olds, but also in terms of the expansion moving forward, how that's going to work out. And of course, the election, as you know, that we kind of, we created a toolkit on the website. And those of you who haven't seen that, please do so, because we have updated with all the new MPs in every single constituency. So if you click on the map, if you click on your local authority area, you will get all the information of who is your local MP, and also how many nurseries there are, what the challenges are, what the hourly rate is in that local authority. All that information is available for a whole of UK. So this is something that we developed pre-election, but now post-election, we are actually updating all that information. I have written to all the new MPs, and I must admit, some of the MPs have come back. They haven't even got their offices and staffing sorted out yet. So that's kind of, the number of new MPs that we have. We've got 650 MPs, but out of that, 334 are brand new. And of course, 211 of them are new MPs, Labour MPs. Now, you must understand that some of them may have been in politics, in local politics. Some of them have been probably completely new to politics. So it's really important. I always say to you, it's important for you to contact your local MP. At the same time, of course, NDNA, I'm kind of contacting all the MPs and have arranged meetings with them separately as well. So it's really important that you need to know who they are and how you can actually talk to them, because don't forget, early years may be completely new to them. And so it's up to us to educate all the new MPs. So we have actually started some MP policy briefings separately as well. So that's just been starting now. And of course, we've got new Lib Dem MPs, 63 Lib Dem MPs now in Westminster. And of course, there are some small parties, and of course, independent MPs have grown as well. When I was at the Labour Party conference, there were all these 20,000 people were there. And some of the new MPs were walking in absolute daze, because for some of them, it may be the first time at the party conference. And it was really, really interesting to see in terms of the debates going on. And what is important, like I said, is to build those relationships with the new MPs and to really educate them in terms of how important early years is, but equally what the challenges are for you as well. And so we've developed that toolkit, which is kept up to date, as I mentioned. And I've written to nearly 2,200 candidates who are now, some of them are MPs as well. And we published the Freedom of Information request on capital funding. And of course, the council underspends as well. Again, if you haven't seen that report, please do have a look at that. And of course, there is an FOI that we published recently on childcare sufficiency assessments and payments, because, what we're hearing is, a lot of people want to expand and have expanded already, but unfortunately, no capital funding has been, allocated yet. As you know, Bridget Phillipson, who was the Secretary of State, and Stephen Morgan is the Minister for Early Education. There is a lot of terminology changes here. I think is something that we recognise, and one of the asks in our manifesto was about changing the kind of the terminology and changing it to early education and childcare rather than just childcare. So the minister, is nice to see that the minister's title is Minister for Early Education, but workforce is also part of his remit as well. I met with Bridget and Stephen a number of times already, and really highlighting some of these challenges, but they are in the listening mode. And of course, it's early stages, and there's an awful lot going on at the moment. And as you know, in terms of the expansion, you've already kind of, started that 15 hours for 9 months old, in terms of, starting from September, obviously 30 hours from 9 months old. And of course, the plan is to deliver 100,000 places across 3,000 more nurseries in vacant primary school spaces. This is something that's been a bit of a concern to all of you in terms of duplication, in terms of sustainability for existing provision, but most importantly for staffing, because we've seen in Scotland when expansion happened, a lot of local authorities actually have taken away staff from the PBS sector, which caused a huge problem, especially at a time of staffing crisis at the moment. So that's a big kind of concern for you all. And of course, the Ofsted single word judgments have been scrapped for schools, but rest of early is to follow. And again, like I said, Jayne and Wendy are here to give you an update on that. The draft legislation published on for VAT on private school fees, this is being fast-tracked, which wasn't expected to happen so quickly, but that's being fast-tracked at the moment. And of course, the Low Pay Commission has now got a new remit to look at living wage and also removing the post-18 age bans. I give evidence to Low Pay Commission every year. And again, we do that research with you in terms of what the impact of the national minimum wage and living wage increases are on your salary bill. Like I said before, 14.4% of increase on your salary bill. So that will have a knock-on effect. And of course, your funding is not increasing 14%. I wish it is. And those are the challenges that we always have, give that evidence. And that's really important. Another issue, which I mentioned again, school-based earliest provision, and some latest announcements that have been made already. 15 million capital funding has been allocated to deliver 300 new or expanded nurseries in the first round. And of course, schools will need to demonstrate how their proposals will meet the local need. Now, I'm hoping that the DFE colleagues will be able to give you a bit more detail in terms of what that means, because like I said, what we don't want to see is existing provision threatened by school provision. And of course, the flexibility the PVI sector offers in terms of, 8:30 to 6 o'clock and not term time only, unlike some of the schools. So that is something that we've highlighted. And of course, the funding will be allocated in spring 2025 for successful schools, but guidance is going to be issued at the date of launch. Now, what I did say to DFE at a recent meeting is that DFE need to work with us on that guidance, because it's really important to make sure we don't have any unintended consequences as a result of the expansion in schools. Breakfast clubs in primary schools has been announced. This is one of the manifesto promises from Labour, and 750 funded primary schools to deliver free breakfast clubs from April 2025, but ahead of the national rollout. And of course, what the guidance where the DFE statement came out, PVI sector schools and local authorities are encouraged to work together, because I know some of you already deliver, wraparound care and breakfast clubs as well in schools. And again, 7 million funding has been allocated for this. The other important thing, of course, is business race review. As you know, we managed to get Scotland and Wales to have completely business race removed for our earlier sector. But the Chancellor has announced a review into business race. This is a wider review for all businesses. So we've again, as part of the submission that we put forward already for the budget on the 30th, this is one of the things that NDNA has been campaigning for years. And this is something that we want the new government to take into account to be able to benefit especially for the earlier sector, because from next April, we're talking about September, we're talking about 80% of the funded places will be coming from the government. So government will be paying for 80% of the funded places. So it's really important to see the sector that as part of that wider education. And that's something that we really keep reminding the government about business race. And of course, it sits within the different departments. So we work across the government in not just with the DFE, but other departments as well. And again, this research is really important to highlight, whatever the new government policies are being announced are coming up, what's really important to really see the state of the sector as it is at the moment. So we published 3 kind of reports. Nursery closures is something that we have been monitoring since the 30 hours was first introduced, going back in 2017. And as you can see, we kind of, tracked about just under 200 closures in the 2023-24 academic year. And of course, this kind of compares to 116 in the previous year. Ofsted figures also show a net loss of 160 nurseries in 23-24. But the most important thing here is that 38% of closures are in the 30% of most deprived areas. And the reason for that is a majority of these nurseries in the deprived areas rely totally on government funding. And of course, they are in areas of deprivation, and that's where we're seeing a lot of closures. And also, it also links to the lowest funding rates. So this is, again, something that we mapped as well. Now, we kind of did a freedom of information request to all local authorities, and we had, majority of them, 98% of the local authorities responded. The reason for this is the government announced last year capital funding for providers who are willing to expand, particularly from this September and also April as well. And what was really shocking is out of the £100 million allocated to local authorities, less than 5 million has been spent. And you can see that 83% of councils have not yet distributed any funds. And council funding models obviously are very different. 93% of paying providers in areas. And of course, you probably have seen the stories in terms of Liverpool and some of the IT issues that Liverpool had, which meant that a lot of providers have not been paid. And that will have a real issue with cash flow for small businesses. So this is something that local authorities should have planned well in advance to be able to make sure providers get the pay, because, staff need to be paid. And that is really important for cash flow. And you can see 4% of councils who fund places termly, they pay after week 4 of the term. But 43% of councils who pay monthly pay in week 3 of the month or later. So really not many people who pay in areas in advance, but they pay in areas. And that is really not good for cash flow. And childcare sufficiency assessments. I mean, one of the things that we have said to the government time and time again is it's not just having an empty classroom and set up a nursery. It's not that simple and straightforward, because what is important is what childcare sufficiency assessments have been done in those areas, what demand and need has been assessed before that provision has been established. And of course, most importantly, working with the PBI sector in terms of what can be done. We know a lot of our members actually deliver school-based provision already, but of course the contracts and the terms that they deliver under really need to be reviewed and revisited to make sure that sustainability won't make an issue in terms of the PBI sector. And again, sufficiency assessments. 83% of councils have done a childcare sufficiency assessment in the past 2 years. And again, what we're looking for is the most up-to-date information in terms of sufficiency, not kind of, historical information. So it's really important to work with the new MPs and make sure that we kind of highlight some of these challenges and get them engaged in some of these debates as well. Ofsted announcements, again, I'm sure you would have seen all that, and the big listen, and of course there's a huge response, and again Wendy and Jayne will cover a lot of this in their presentation. Single word judgments have been scrapped for schools, but that's to come, and report cards to come to replace the single word judgments for early years. And again, the process and how that's going to happen, what would be involved, all that, again, we're waiting to hear as well. And plan changes, again, since Sir Martin Oliver has taken over, we've had regular meetings, not only with him and with the senior team, with the Ofsted, in terms of looking at some of these issues, and also the big listen report, which has got a number of changes that are going to be coming forward. And one of the things we've always said is that it's important to make sure, not do things to the sector, but make sure that DFE and Ofsted need to engage with the sector, because the implications and the impact of some of these changes can be enormous for you. And I think that's really important. That's the message that we've been giving constantly. And again, Wendy and Jayne will update you on these as well. So just in terms of looking at what's been happening, and like I said, NDNA is not about moaning about things and what needs to be done, but we're also about solutions as well. And the Mass Champion program is something that we've been delivering, and the enormous amount of research already that demonstrated how this program has improved the understanding both for children and the staff, and it is free. And the program is now extended. So please contact the team if you're interested in this. And again, our awards have just been announced. next year NDNA conference is going to be in Liverpool, and please put yourself forward for the nursery awards for next year. So I'm going to move us all very quickly because I know you want to hear a lot more detail from both from DFE and Ofsted.
Thank you for Purnima for that. So we're going to move quickly on to the introductions from our exhibitors. So hopefully you're all ready. So I'll introduce you in turn. Nigel, time for your introduction.
Yeah, cheers, Glenn. Good afternoon, anyone. Hope you're having a great time. Thanks, Purnima, for that introduction. Lots of information. Our session a bit later on at 5 o'clock. Gill McAteer is going to be talking a lot about the employment law changes that we've got coming up. There's a huge raft of changes, so get your pens at the ready. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat. You can probably hear my Dashans very excited about the employment law changes in the background as well. So, yep, hope everyone has a great afternoon. Thanks very much.
Thank you to Nigel and his Dashans. We'll go to Courtney Donaldson now from Christie & Co.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're once again delighted to be sponsoring the NDNA member events. So, as always, we're here to support you with your business property needs. Clearly, lots of change in the sector, lots of growth as well. So, whether you're needing advice on raising funds for expansion and increasing and creating new capacity, or valuations or rent review advice, we're here to assist you with that. So we hope you enjoy the afternoon. Great speakers coming up and hopefully lots of informative information. So enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. I'd now like to introduce Simon Howarth from CPOMS.
Good evening. Really nice to be coming along to this, our first event with NDNA. Just wanting to really share the fact that CPOMS has been expanding into nurseries in the last year, and do take advantage of a demonstration of the product and take advantage of that special 5% off that we're offering to NDNA members on top of our nursery pricing. Hopefully see you at lots of events upcoming this year. Certainly I know we're out at some in November. So yeah, really enjoying this so far and looking forward to hearing some more of the information.
Great, thank you, Simon. And now over to Sarah Benetti from the Institute of Early Years Education.
Good afternoon. It is the first time for us as well because we are just born. We are the Institute of Early Years Education. We're here to bring together professionals in the early education and care sector, creating a collaborative community for everybody, from those established in the sector to those just starting out on their career pathway. We are committed to empower you to take charge of your professional and personal development and to support your well-being, helping to feel more confident, healthy, and enthusiastic in the incredible work that you do. Together, we're building a community that recognizes the special role that you play in shaping your own professional future and the next generations too. I'll pop the link to the Institute homepage in the chat, and if anybody has a question, just feel free to drop a line or to drop a question in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you to all our supporters. Our sponsors and exhibitors will be here throughout today's event. And please ensure you use the chat box for any questions you have for them. We're now going to have a message from the Under Secretary of State for Early Education, Stephen Morgan MP, and I'm going to hand over to Purnima to introduce it. Purnima.
Hello, everybody. When I met with the Minister recently, again, not just at the Labour Party conference, but also at the breakfast seminar at the Childcare Expo, and because he's travelling and he's kind of visiting a number of nurseries, and we were asked if he could come to the member event and join us. Unfortunately, he's away at the moment, and so he sent us a video recorded message. And I just wanted to play this to you so that, you know, I'm sure some of you may have heard him, I've seen him before, because he has been visiting nurseries. So we'll put that message on here.
It was a real privilege to be appointed Minister for Early Education back in July. It's the right title for the job because everyone who works in early years is an educator. You and your staff help children develop their physical, emotional and cognitive abilities. That takes unique skill built through considerable experience and hard-earned qualifications. It is work that really matters, work that I will champion in government. I've already been getting out and about, visiting nurseries across the country, and I hosted roundtables for the sector leaders in August and September. Hopefully some of you are on the call today. I'm keen to meet many more early years leaders and practitioners in the coming weeks and months ahead, and to continue the conversation, because we want to reset the relationship between government and the sector. As you may know, it's our mission to break down the barriers to opportunity. We want many more children to access the fantastic care that you offer, but we cannot hope to do this without including you in our plans. I want to hear from your experiences as early education providers, what's working well and what's not, how we can together give every child the best start in life. I want to end by thanking you for delivering approximately 15,000 funded childcare places to meet demand for the latest stage of the rollout. I know it takes a lot of planning and admin at nurseries like yours to bring this about, and I want to acknowledge that work you do too. As you know, we want to continue the rollout next year, but I don't underestimate the challenge for everyone involved. Thank you for all your efforts to support young children and extend opportunity across this country. I look forward to speaking to you in person to discuss how we can reach more children and together transform their life chances. Thank you.
Hi, Purnima. I don't know if you wanted to jump back in, just introduce us, but
yeah, sure.
Just to pick up from here.
Well, as I mentioned to everybody at the beginning, I'm delighted that at a short notice, Mike Davies and Suzanne Taylor are able to join us today. And as I mentioned, there's lots of changes and challenges for the sector. And I hope that you'll be able to answer some of the questions. And if they can't answer the questions today, but we can, I'm sure you can take them away and come back to us at some point. That will be great. And after the presentations, please put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A box as well. So welcome both Mike and Suzanne to our autumn member event.
Thanks very much, and delighted to be here. Thanks for the invite. I think the first thing I should probably say is sorry that I'm not the minister, but we will do our best to keep you up to date with all the work that's going on in the department. Early days still for the government, but I think you got a sense there from the minister's presentation of just how important this is to him, and it's fantastic for us as also to have for the first time a dedicated Minister for Early Education. So just to introduce myself, so my details on here, but I'm Mike Davies, Deputy Director in the Department for Early Years, Markets, Strategy and Workforce. And Suzanne is with me as well, who's working on rolling out the school-based nursery expansion, and will also pick up later in the slides. You see if I can move on. I can, so we don't have to look at that terrible photo of me any longer. So I thought it was perhaps helpful just to kind of start with a quote from the Secretary of State from the letter that she sent out soon after her appointment, which hopefully everyone has seen, but I think just really, again, like emphasizes that this, she's kind of reiterated it a number of times, including in her speech at the Labour Party conference, how important early years is to her personally. It's one of, if not her top priority in her new role, which is great news for us. I hope great news for you. And that kind of message comes across really clearly, that they want to work hand in hand with the sector, and I've talked about delivering a real sea change in our early years system. So exciting times. I'll perhaps just summarise some of the kind of early actions and successes. So I think one of the focuses obviously around access to places and affordable places. So thank you, thanks to your hard work, I think the latest stage of the entitlements rollout has been a real success. So we've had over 200,000 parents now have secured a place in this latest expansion, which is fantastic news, and and really down to many of you on the call today. So thank you. I focus as well around kind of availability and accessibility of early education and childcare, and trying to increase that around the country. So part of that is delivering new places through space that's available in primary schools, also through the commitment around providing free breakfast club provision in every primary school, and some activities which I can talk more about in a second, around giving greater flexibility to childminders in how they operate. Also a real focus for our new ministers in quality at the heart of the offer. So the Secretary of State has talked, and the Labour manifesto talked about some really ambitious targets to increase the number of children meeting early learning goals. And that's really central to the Secretary of State's opportunity mission, and promoting the best start in life, which is one of the sort of organising principles now for us, around which we're basing kind of all of our work. Some actions we've taken already to extend funding for Nelly through to the end of the year, which has already had huge reach, over 200,000 children benefiting, and then hopefully many more to come over the coming months. A commitment around driving up standards in early maths, and increasing quality in both nursery schools and primary schools. I heard Purnima talking about the commitment to replace single headline grades, which is already taken action on that, and there's now work in hand to build the reporting card that will replace it. And of course, something very central to my role, especially, growing, supporting, and promoting our brilliant workforce, and a real emphasis for our ministers on wanting to recognise, and you heard that again in the kind of ministers' words, the sort of skill and expertise that those in the sector hold, and their role as educators. Obviously, we're trying to recruit more staff, and I know you guys are trying to recruit as well. And hopefully people have seen the advertising campaign, Do Something Big, Work with Small Children, which has been re-energised in the last few months. I've been seeing the posters everywhere. I think it's fantastic, and hopefully it's making your job a little bit easier. And then underpinning all of that, I guess, just a sort of reset in relationships and engagement with you as our sector partners, and that commitment to work together and involve you in changes yet to come. Let me see if I can move on, or I might have got stuck. There we go. I wanted to highlight some of the support that we've made available through the Childcare Works service. Hopefully you've seen this and been able to access it. There's a variety of useful tools on there. So it includes best practice guidance from Dingley's Promise on creating inclusive environments. It includes some business planning tools and videos and sort of training to help settings and support them with delivering the new entitlements, kind of building that into your business models. There is a suite of promotional materials on there based around the campaign, posters, leaflets, for you, hopefully to help you to communicate with families about the changes and what they're now entitled to. And then some various kind of management essentials as well, covering kind of business concepts and strategic planning and practical support on how to kind of grow and expand your businesses. Would be really keen to hear people's feedback on that, whether it's helpful, how we could continue to improve it. But I hope that's a useful resource for you. We've also been running provider roadshows all around the country. So we've run 7 so far this year, and there are more in the pipeline. If you haven't been to one of those, or had the opportunity, then please do sign up. There, it's a full day and lots of opportunity for discussion and debate. And we've been reflecting on some of the feedback as well and how we can adjust our approach for that. So the Childcare Works resource came out of that. We've heard very clearly about the challenges of workforce costs on your kind of bottom line, and have taken steps to reflect that in the funding formula, including changes to national minimum wage. So we know, of course, that recruitment can be a real challenge. So we've got the campaign, and we've been testing that as it's gone through and adapting it in response to your feedback. We heard concerns about the use of free in describing the entitlements. So we've shifted now to government funded in our communications with parents. And we try to also provide some kind of practical tools to help you communicate with parents about their entitlements and how they can access them, and to make sure as many as possible are registered and had secured a place by the deadline, which has been a huge success. A couple of them more specific things I was going to pick up. So obviously breakfast clubs. And people will have seen the Chancellor announcement around this and the launch of the early adopter scheme. So the ambition there is for up to 750 state-funded schools to begin delivering free breakfast clubs from next April. And then the funding is to allow them to run those over the summer term. And we hope to use that then to kind of like test and learn, understand what works and what doesn't, and refine the approach ahead of a national rollout. Want to emphasise, obviously, there is already a lot of PVI provision in this space, and so schools will be absolutely working with PVI partners in how they deliver this expansion. Further guidance is kind of on the way, but there is a page now on gov.uk if you want to find out more, and if you want to kind of like sign up for alerts as new guidance comes out. I was also going to mention the childminder flexibilities that we're introducing. So these will go live from the 1st of November. And at the heart here is to create a new category of childminder who can work entirely from non-domestic premises, taking kind of some inspiration from France and a model that's been quite successful over there. So we're hoping this will be a success here, and we're keen to understand what we need to do from government in order to support that. The changes also allow an increase from 3 to 4 in the total number of people who can operate under a single registration. And then there is some flexibility as well for childminders who still have a registered domestic premises to spend more time operating away from those premises, which could be all sorts of settings, including kind of community halls or schools. And we've built in some safeguards, so this won't affect any existing registrations. So no one will have to change their current registration. It's for new registrations only. And I know you're also keen to hear about the latest plans on school-based nursery expansion. So I will pause there and invite Suzanne to come on.
Thank you. Sorry, Mike. Do you want to take a couple of questions now, or do you want to do it at the end after Suzanne finished her?
After, because this is the final slide. And
okay, that's fine. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks Purnima and others for having us on this call. The first thing I'll just say, of course, we recognise school-based nurseries are not a new thing. Around half of primary schools already have some form of nursery provision on site. We also recognise that some schools are experiencing falling school rolls, and where this is occurring in areas with unmet early years need, some of this increasing free space will be suitable for new expanded nursery provision. I'm sure by now everyone's seen some of the coverage from last week that announced that state-funded primary phase schools will be invited to bid for a share of £15 million of capital funding later in October, with capacity in this first phase of the programme to deliver up to 300 new or expanded nurseries, and we'll just emphasise they're new or expanded. So it could be existing nursery provision on a school site that would like to expand. I also just want to be clear that, as is already the case, these nurseries can be school run or they can be delivered by a private and voluntary early years provider, providing it is on the primary phase school site. This is very much because the department is eager to work with both schools and the wider early years sector together to deliver the childcare places that families need. I'd also like to reassure that as part of applying for this funding, schools will need to demonstrate how their proposals will respond to early year and childcare need in their local area. We're also working to ensure that LAs have the opportunity to input on any local proposals, given their role and knowledge in managing local childcare sufficiency. And we've worked with a number of representatives, including from providers and local authorities and schools, in developing this. So this funding is the first step to delivering the government's ambition for new places in school-based nurseries, and it will very much be used as a test and learn for future years to ensure the programme is delivered in a way that will benefit parents and children. As part of this learning, schools who are not currently ready to apply or don't meet the current eligibility criteria that will be made available later this month will also be able to express an interest for any future phases of the programme. And DfE will continue to work closely with schools, local authorities and providers, ensuring that we understand what is needed to deliver this new provision, ensure that new school-based nurseries are in the right places and do meet the needs of parents, children and schools, and ensure that existing local sufficiency is considered when making any funding decisions. I'll pause there, and then I think Mike and I can both take any reflections and questions. I will just caveat, I suppose, that there is a limit sort of for commercial reasons on what we can say about the funding that will be available in the process when it opens later this month. But we're keen to take on board feedback to make sure we're considering this in our comms and FAQs when we do launch and as the programme evolves for future years. And I appreciate you may have questions for Mike as well.
Thank you very much, Mike and Suzanne. So I've got a few questions. Obviously, this is a big area of concern for the PBS sector, as I mentioned to you in previous meetings as well. And can you all see me? Yeah? Can you hear me? It was a sudden...
All fine, Purnima, all fine.
Yeah, sudden blip there. Yeah, just a couple of questions. First of all, obviously the concerns in terms of school provision, but if I can just start with the breakfast clubs, what steps have been taken to ensure that all PBI costs are covered in providing free breakfast clubs in schools everywhere in the country where PBIs are already providing this, currently paid by parents?
Yeah, and I think it's very early days, so there's a lot of detail like that to be worked through. I know the team are working on that kind of that detailed guidance now, and engaging very, very widely on it. So I think this is all the kind of stuff that we need to work through on the policy. But the intention is certainly to kind of build on the provision that already exists and help extend that where it's not currently available. But it's a really helpful point to hear. We'll feed that back into the team.
And another question about the Do Something Big campaign. Are there any plans to expand this? Because a lot of people have lost many qualified people after COVID, and basically staffing is a major issue. So are there any future plans to expand this?
Yeah, and I mean, firstly, it's the first time I think the government's ever run a campaign in this related to early years recruitment. So it's a big win to get the big investment. And people might have seen that the government was looking at areas it could cut back in this space, and the budget for this has been protected, which has been a huge win for us. I think we do want to target, obviously, returning staff as much as new recruits, and be interested in people's thoughts and suggestions on the best way to do that. We're very aware that there are a lot of people who've left the sector over recent years, and already have the skills and the qualifications to be able to kind of come back in. And we're really keen to try and help you kind of recruit as many of those people as possible. So definitely, they're definitely our target audience. And if people have like suggestions on how better we could be targeting them, then very keen to hear them.
And the other question, of course, is staffing. There are lots of questions on staffing, not only how people can actually pay staff and be able to retain them, but most importantly, the school-based provision. If they start recruiting staff and taking staff from the PBS sector, which happened in Scotland and caused a huge problem, which even the government admitted to that. And how was that going to be managed or monitored?
I can come in here. Thank you. I think that the first thing I'll just reiterate, obviously, is school-based nurseries. Numerous do open up each year, and we are talking about a relatively small scale in this first instance at up to 300. And including expansions, and that will very much be used to learn for future phases. And we sort of acknowledge a project of this scale, takes time to prepare, needs to be delivered in a way that won't cause added pressure to the early years system, including in the workforce space. And taking this kind of phased approach means that we can consider those wider interdependencies with other early years and wider education policies as they evolve, and that of course includes things like workforce. There's already a huge amount of work, as Mike has already said, going on across the department to recruit and train additional staff. So it's very much trying to do these two things in tandem, as well as being clear that these expanded and new school-based nurseries on school sites can be operated by PVIs. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, and one more question. I mean, there are lots of questions, I'm sure, as you can imagine, that this is an area of a real concern. In terms of offering, schools offering early years provision, how can they be transparent to parents in terms of the ratios and also the difference in these in regards to PVI in school settings? Because as you know, the inspection regime is also different for school-based provision. What age range will the new nursery target, and what impact do you feel this will have on staff retention and PVI sector? Very similar to the question that we've had.
Thank you, Purnima. I'll start with the age range one. So this programme is, of course, in part to support the expansion of government-funded hours of childcare in early years. And as part of applying, schools will need to demonstrate how their proposals respond to need in their local area. However, we're not placing age restrictions as a blanket restriction on schools applying for capital funding, as we know the demand for provision serving different ages will vary across the country. But schools will need to show how they meet that in their local area. And as I said previously, we're designing that role for local authorities so they can also input on meeting that demand, including by age group. And then, we will learn from this phase for any future years, including sort of better understanding of how we can support those underserved and poorer areas and how things may differ by age groups in different areas. There was a question there, I think, about different requirements for school-run nurseries versus PVIs and being transparent with parents. We are developing sort of quite extensive guidance for schools, which will be published for anyone to view as well. That will outline what's involved with establishing a school-based nursery if they are new to it. Covering things like different ratios, requirements around registration and things like that, and as well as advice on liaising with parents. So those are the sorts of things that we would, expect schools to be transparent with parents about. And we will also be looking further at the support we can provide to successful applicants once funding has been allocated.
Okay. Well, still lots of questions. I'm sure you can see from the chat and from the Q&A as well. Again, everything related to staffing and of course the funding challenges and of course the school-based provision. But I think this is an area, Mike and Suzanne, that we do need to communicate on a regular basis. In terms of those criteria, what criteria schools have. And of course, the other issue also is some local authorities work very well with providers in their area. And unfortunately, that's not the case for everybody. So I think it's really important how that guidance is developed with the sector to support the sector so that we don't have some of these unintended consequences as providers have been putting in the chat and the Q&A. I'm conscious of the time, so can we pass on some of these questions to you, please, to both of you? And if you can get back to us on these, because I know that we've got Ofsted as well speaking later on, and we'll come back to some of this again. And what would be really good is, which I did ask at the last meeting as well, that if we could do an update to the sector that we can share with our members in terms of some of these changes and challenges. I know you put things on an update on the gov.uk website, but it's really important that it's difficult for providers to wade through the gov.uk website sometimes. So if you could send us that kind of communication on a regular basis, that will be really useful.
I was going to say, Purnima, we are a little bit ahead of time, so there are a few minutes.
That's fine then. Okay, so I'm sure you can see the Q&A and the chat. So do you want to pick up any of these questions, please, both of you?
I mean, I think there was kind of some general questions about, just pay and the ability to offer a competitive rate of pay in the sector. I think we were been very mindful of that in setting the rates for the new entitlements and in the uplift that we were able to secure from the Treasury as existing rates this year, and that commitment around those continuing to rise in line with sort of sector inflation. This is always a negotiation, but we're always advocating and appreciate there's always further that we could go. But I guess just to sort of reassure you that we will advocate really strongly for the sector in those discussions, and we'll always doing our best to get the best possible rates that we can prize out of our colleagues in the Treasury. But recognise there's always further we could go.
I think the concern again is, Mike, is with our FOI demonstrated only 5% of the capital funding has been allocated. And I think, that capital funding has been there with the local authorities since last year. And if that is for expansion, some providers have already expanded, and looking for any support in some local authority areas. Some members reported they've already started it because they had to, and waiting for the applications to come out. So, and of course, the earliest funding, which, every year for the past 5 years, we've been doing the FOI, and the underspends this year alone, last year alone was 65 million, So if all that money allocated to earliest and childcare has been passed on to providers, situation wouldn't have been as bad as this. And I think that's is historical really. And so funding keeping up with the cost increases, and of course wage increases has been the biggest challenge.
Yeah, and we're always in touch with local authorities to make sure that as soon as rates are set nationally, that they are turning those around and announcing their local rates as quickly as possible. And we're taking some steps to try and speed up that process to make sure that they are passing through as much as possible the funding that they receive. And again, we'll see some improvements in that space, I think, in next year, in the next round. On capital funding, I know, so we'll be collecting data back from local authorities next year to confirm that they have made use of all the funding that was allocated. I think from what we kind of gather in, where they haven't already, they have plans to, and have a kind of a system ready to get it out. I think because obviously with next September being the big expansion, quite a few are sort of holding back to have held back to make sure that they're using it at the right time. But absolutely, we have the same objective as you, that the money that we're putting out into the system is going into those services and to the children who would benefit from them. Okay. There was something, I think, there was some stuff on school nurseries as well, Suzanne, maybe on kind of like the age range that we're expecting them to be catering for, and whether that's likely to be all the way down to 9 months.
Yes, I think, as mentioned, we are expecting this to support expansion. We are not putting restrictions on what age provision schools can apply for capital funding to support, but schools will need to show how they're meeting local demand, and local authorities will be able to input on that as well. What we expect this means is we'll likely receive more applications for the sort of higher ages, as is more common on school site nursery provision, but they will have to demonstrate that there is demand for this, and obviously we'll be using this as a test and learn phase to see what the interest is in different age groups, and the support that schools need. We're of course putting into guidance around establishing a school-based nursery, what all the requirements are for different ages and the sorts of environment to provide schools support in that sense, as well as looking into what additional support will need to be provided to successful applicants.
Will the focus be, I think one of the questions is for the deprived areas, schools in deprived areas, are rather than just falling numbers?
So this first phase is open across the country, but we are very much taking it as a test and learn, and we know some of those areas of unmet need are in those more deprived areas. So we will be looking at how we can support and encourage provision in those sorts of areas as this programme goes on over time.
Right, sorry to interrupt everybody, but I think we are now at the time for the next speaker. I know there's been a lot of observations in the chat there, so if you want to round up, sorry, Penny, and I'll
that's fine. As you can see, there are a lot of unanswered questions, and I'm sure the policy develops, but I think really what we would urge Mike and Suzanne is to kind of talk to the sector, talk to us before anything is finalized, especially the guidance and the criteria, because some providers want to deliver on school premises, so we need to really see that criteria as well. So if that can be shared with everybody, and also how they can work with the local authorities, that's a really strong message in terms of school-based provision from everybody. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Suzanne, for making the time today, and thanks for coming.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I'm now going to move on to our next speaker, who is Gill McAteer from Citation. So if you are ready, Gillian, I'll pass over to you.
Yes, I am. Thanks very much, Glenn, and good afternoon, everyone. In the session this afternoon, I'm going to be looking at what we can expect to see in terms of employment law changes from the Labour government. Now, before the election, they had produced their plan to make work pay, which set out 30 very significant employment law changes. Obviously, they were not going to be rolled out at once, but in the King's speech, they reiterated their commitment that employment law change was one of their top legislative priorities, and a lot of the most fundamental changes they were going to be putting through a new employment rights bill, which they committed to publishing within their first 100 days in government, which would make it published by the 12th of October. So this is something that we're expecting to land any day now. Realistically, it probably will have to be by the 10th of October, because I think the 12th falls on a Saturday and they don't publish main government bills on a Friday. But in the session today, we already know from the King's speech what's going to be in this bill in outline. So I'm going to just talk through some of those changes. I should say that this does not mean to say that this is going to necessarily be implemented in the very short term. It will take time to go through Parliament. It's certainly, in terms of employment law, it's the most hotly lobbied bill I've seen. again, because there's lots of employers think this could be very detrimental to their business. So I think it is going to take some time to go through Parliament. So the very earliest we could see any changes would be April next year. I think that's unlikely. I think most of the changes are likely to be staggered either later in 2025 or indeed possibly some into April 26. So the first one, and I'm going to discuss, and one which I'm sure you will have heard about already, is for the first time they're going to be scrapping the service requirement to bring a claim for ordinary unfair dismissal. So ever since there has been a right to claim unfair dismissal, there has always been this concept that you need to serve a minimum period with your employer before you can actually bring a claim of that nature. And various times it's been 1 year, currently it's 2 years, but it really ingrains in employers the idea that there are short service employees. So until you get that 2-year service requirement, unless there's something discriminatory or another protected reason which might be related to their dismissal, if they just don't think it's fair that they lose their employment, there's nothing that can be done about it. And so, as I said, what the government is saying is, well, no, we believe that this is actually stifling movement in the marketplace. There's a lot of people who perhaps would want to move to a different role, but are scared to because they're thinking, well, I'm going to have to serve 2 years before I get my full employment rights. So we're just going to make this a day one right. Having said that, it's not going to be completely a day one right, because the government have made it clear that they do acknowledge it would be reasonable to have a probationary period, and therefore dismissals within a probationary period would not necessarily attract the right to claim unfair dismissal, as long as those probationary period processes are clear and transparent. Now, what we anticipate is that the government, when the draft legislation is published, they're going to say there's going to be a maximum limit on probationary periods. And again, if reports are to believe, there was a lot of toing and froing with some members of government thinking that this should be as short as 3 months, where others arguing it should be as long as 9 months. It's likely to be set in the middle. But that will mean that they will get around the potential problem of people saying, right, we're going to have a 2-year probationary period. So what this would mean for employers now, I think, in terms of getting ready for it, will be, because of course a lot of businesses have been used to managing people in a different way when they have short service, but really it's going to be everywhere from the recruitment process. I mean, obviously, I know you all do what you can to make sure that you're bringing the right people into the business in the first place, but this is going to be even more important when those people are going to have rights from day one. But not only that, making sure that you're giving them, and you can show that you're giving them everything they need to be able to do the job properly and be supported in that probationary period. So if they're not working out, they're not going to be able to turn around and say, well, I didn't get the support. And then equally, in terms of performance, managing them outside of that probationary period to be really hot on it. I don't think it's necessarily all bad news for employers, I've got to say, because one of the things we did see with the increase in the service requirement for unfair dismissal rights was because so many people were unable to bring a claim that had previously been allowed to bring a claim if they'd had 1 year's service. What instead they were doing was trying to link their dismissal to discrimination. So I'm hoping that with these increased rights to bring ordinary unfair dismissal, we may see a suppression in discrimination and whistleblowing, those sorts of claims, which are being brought simply because employees can't get into tribunal without having some special protected reason related to that dismissal. The next development, and I think this is something which is likely to be implemented very quickly, is the establishment of a new one single labour market enforcement body. So unlike, for example, health and safety, where you've got the HSE, who's responsible for health and safety regulation within across the sectors, we don't really have that equivalent in employment law. So there's like little agencies here and there that are responsible for various aspects where the government or the state gets involved in employment law enforcement. The Labour government made it very clear they do not think this is fit for purpose, and they think that it really is a barrier for giving swift enforcement of justice to employees. So what they want to do is create this new single labour market enforcement agency, which they're going to call the Fair Work Agency. And I think the reason this will be done very, very quickly is because actually this is something the Conservative government had committed to introducing several years ago. It's been knocking around as a concept for many years. But I think given that it's going to come into being under Labour, we're really going to see that this organisation is going to have real teeth. And already the government have said that it will have new powers of enforcement and new powers of inspection. One of the things they're going to be looking at really closely is what it says in people's contracts, because I think the government have identified that it's all very well having workers' rights, but if they don't know about it, then they're not like it's a real barrier to those rights being enforced, and therefore. And how are they going to know about it if they're not going to go and do some research or speak to someone to seek advice on their rights? It's going to be what their contract tells them they're entitled to. So I think we'll see a real crackdown on compliance on what it actually says in contracts. The next change, and again, this will be absolutely massive, in particular in relation to a lot of sectors that we really specialise in, such as the nursery sector, the construction sector, the care sector, and it's the use of 0 hours contracts what the government. It's been bandied about that the government are going to be banning 0 hours contracts. That's not actually what they're saying they're going to do. They're saying they're going to ban exploitative 0 hours contracts. We don't know what they're going to consider to be exploitative, but one thing that we do know is that they are going to give workers the right to have a contract which reflects their regular working hours. And what they will do is they will look at the previous 12 weeks as being reflective of what their regular working hours are. Now, immediately, I can think of lots of potential issues with that, because there can be lots of reasons why people have worked a higher number of hours over a 12-week period, which is not necessarily going to be a predictor of what you're going to need them to do on an ongoing basis. And I think that perhaps the government have underestimated just how reliant so many businesses have become on this idea of flexibility within their within the labour market. So I think that this will definitely be an area where it will be very important to understand exactly what impact this will have on businesses, and really how to start planning now, so that by the time it actually is implemented, should it be at some time next year or even potentially April 26, everything is in order for it. Another thing which they're going to do, and they've spelled out pretty clearly how this will operate, is give a new right to workers to have reasonable notice of a change in their hours or their shift. So, for example, unless you've got something in your contract which says that that there is some set hours around it, If someone says, well, I need you to come in Monday and Tuesday, and then all of a sudden you don't need them to come in, you can just contact them at the last minute and say, I'm sorry, we don't need you. And as I say, unless you've got any contractual terms which affect that, it's perfectly lawful. And what the government is saying is, no, that we're going to introduce the concept of reasonable notice. If you're not given reasonable notice, then you'll be entitled to compensation. We don't know how that compensation is going to be calculated at the minute. We just know that it will be on a sliding scale. So the less notice you get, the higher the compensation will be. But again, I think even the concepts of, well, as in every area of employment law where the term reasonable pops up, it's always so thwart with issues, because what is reasonable going to be when you're talking about so many different sectors, so many different organizations, so many different reasons where as to why the change might have occurred. Sometimes it's completely outside the employer's fault. A lot of businesses doing work with local authorities, for example, may only be told at the last minute it's not needed. And it's a question of to what extent does the employer have to carry the burden for something which in effect isn't their fault. So as I said, these are going to be critical changes which although there has been previously consultation on this, right to reasonable notice, I think there's likely to be more consultation built in under the umbrella of this legislative reform. And it's difficult to see at the minute how they're going to have one set of rules which is going to apply in so many different situations. Flexible working, well, it always pops up, doesn't it? The more changes to flexible working. Of course, we've already had quite a significant number of changes to flexible working in April this year, with it becoming a day one right, etc. And you might have seen some publicity earlier last month where it was saying everyone's going to have the right to ask for a 4-day, compressed hours working week. Of course, you could ask for compressed hours at the minute. We don't need a legislative change for that. What the government have actually said they're going to do is they're going to try to make it the default by positioning it so that a more flexible working arrangement really should be what's put in place, unless you can show it's genuinely not feasible. So I read that to be they're going to be increasing, the evidential proof that you have to show that actually it's not something which is feasible. But again, that's something that we would always advise you look at now anyway. Regardless of all the talk around flexible working, business owners should be assured that there is nothing in this or nothing in the proposals in the past which is meant to take away your right for making decisions which are best for your business. And because after all, the government's big agenda is growth, so they do not want to make it harder for you to grow your business. So it's no one's interest to impose something on you which actually is causing the business difficulties. I think the real question is going to be proving that. And that's something that we often find ourselves working with clients, because when they instinctively, when an application comes in, they know why it wouldn't work, or what the limits of that would have to be. But it's actually just going through the processes of showing that you have all the evidence in place and you've explained that to the employee. The right to switch off, this is not something which is in line for the Employment Rights Bill, but it doesn't need primary legislation to introduce it. I've just included it because it's something which there is an awful lot of talk around. This is likely to be introduced via statutory code, but I do think it's likely that there will be, well, it's inevitable there's going to be consultation around this, but it's going to be around the principle of actually recognising people's right to switch off in their own time, and employers respect it, and you shouldn't really be penalised or treated to your detriment in some way because you're not prepared to answer emails or WhatsApp messages out of hours. However, even in the general proposal that we've seen at the minute, there is an indication that, of course, the government recognise that there will definitely be times when you do have to do this. It's just going to be a question of the degree of doing that. There's also, interestingly, some speculation that there might be an exemption for smaller employers. So, as I said, we should see more on that. But it is actually quite a good exercise to think, well, how are you contacting people, and what are you expecting from them? We carried out a survey a few years ago, just actually as we were coming out of COVID, and we found that a really high percentage of employers were regularly contacting their employees outside of their working hours for business purposes. I think a habit that had very much grown out of, the much more flexible working arrangements people had during COVID. But the corresponding survey with employees also bore out the fact that they were being contacted a lot more often, but there was very high levels of frustration and resentment about this, because not so much the fact that they the fact that they were being contacted out of work, but the fact that they felt it was assumed they would respond. And I think that is one of the real issues that people had, that they felt that this was being taken for granted. The government has said they're going to be extending employment tribunal time limits. So at the minute, there's a relatively short amount of time to bring it. Most employment tribunal claims of 3 months. That's going to be doubled to 6 months. And there was some pay reforms, as was mentioned earlier. The Low Pay Commission are going to be taking in cost of living as one of the factors, and they're also going to be, scrapping the adult age bands. What is of more concern, I think, is what's being proposed in relation to SSP. And I think this is definitely something worth bearing in mind at the moment. So what the government is saying is that they are going to scrap the current requirement that employees have to earn at least the lower earnings threshold of £123 per week in order to qualify. But also, more importantly, they're going to scrap the waiting day period. So at the minute, of course, if you're absent from work, the first 3 days of sickness absence, you don't get SSP for. They're the 3 waiting days. I suppose from an employee's perspective, this is terrible because I'm genuinely sick and I don't get paid if I don't come into work, because the reality is most small businesses don't offer company sick pay schemes. From an employer's perspective, of course, that those waiting days act, if you like, as a bit of a buffer, from people thinking, oh, I don't really fancy going into work today, but I'd better go, because if I don't go, I'm not going to get paid. And I think, certainly businesses I've been speaking to are really concerned that this is going to increase what is already a very, very challenging issue they've got with sickness absence in their business. And we can see in terms of the percentage of advice that we give on employment issues that relate to sickness absence, that for years had been around about 5 to 7% of all advice we gave. Even after COVID, that was maybe 9%, I think, in the 12 months after COVID. But it's currently running at 15% of all advice. And I think this is going to definitely have an impact on that as well. What things to think about now is looking at how you actively manage sickness absence in your business. Do you know what your average rate of sickness absence is? Do you know how many people are over that? Do you know why they're over that? Is it being actively managed? Do you have systems in place where people always have return to work interviews and are completing self-certificates? Because just active monitoring itself is often enough to actually cause an improvement in sickness absence levels. So that's definitely something I think businesses will need to be looking at. Addressing equality issues in the workplace. That's something, again, which is very much on the government's agenda. We've got the Worker Protection Amendment of Equality Act coming into force on the 26th of October, introducing this new right or this new duty on employers to make sure they're taking reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace. This also, the Equality and Human Rights Commission have updated their guidance last week, and they've made it clear that this extends to third parties as well, and that they intend to take a very proactive role in doing this. And one of the things that they're urging businesses to do is to be carrying out a risk assessment to see what is the risk of sexual harassment and be taking steps to prevent that. But also the government have lots of other changes planned, including making it unlawful to dismiss someone within 6 months of their return from maternity leave, apart from certain specified circumstances. And fire and rehire, this is where you're dismissing and offering to re-engage in circumstances where you need to change people's contracts, but they're not prepared to consent to it. Ultimately, your weapon is to dismiss and offer to re-engage in the new terms. We had a code of practice that came in force on the 1st of July. The government have already said, well, no, that doesn't go nearly far enough. We are going to make it a requirement that you won't be able to do this unless there's genuinely no alternative but to push through that change, which is a much higher evidential threshold. And also we're going to enforce that by making it so expensive if you get it wrong. We're going to really increase the penalties in this, which of course assumes that employers know the right way to do it. I think this could be really punishing for employers making a mistake in this area. Union reforms, lots of new rights, and lots of repealing of the most recent restrictive union legislation. So I think that is a bit of a canter through. I think we should have 1 or 2 minutes left if there were any questions on that.
Thank you, Nigel. Are you popping in and asking these questions, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I'll get so I can jump in, Glenn, if that's all right. So, yeah, Jill, we've got a couple. I'll put the first one. So, how does the reasonable notice in work pattern change reconcile with government's wish for PVIs to be flexible in their offer to parents for government-funded provision?
No, well, it doesn't.
It doesn't. No, it doesn't.
No.
Yeah.
And I do think that, that's just one very good example of so many circumstances where actually it's incumbent on the employer to be flexible in their service offering, but that in turn is the reliance on having a flexible workforce which can respond to that. And I think this is, again, one of the areas where there'll be so much lobbying. I think the government really underestimate the extent to which flexible working is a reality on which so many business models has been built, and you can't just simply dismantle that overnight.
Perfect. And the next one, and again, you might be an obvious answer. Is there any acknowledgement from government that the increase in SSP has the risk of crippling the PVI sector as cover becomes almost unaffordable?
No, I'm afraid not.
I'm going to need to order some more stress balls for next year's conference in Liverpool, aren't I, everyone? So, so we just got a quick, Glenn, jump in at any point if we're going to go over time here on what I can do. If there's any other questions that we can't get to.
We've got time for the that last question at the bottom there.
So Lynn in the webinar chat said, what system of managing staff absence works best? If you use Citation, you can use the Atlas system, which is fantastic. Jill, any ideas on managing staff absences and what system works best, what methodology?
Well, some businesses are great fans of things like the Bradford factor, where you have a very, very clear trigger process, and people know when you're going to be moving to an escalation. Personally, as an employment solicitor, I see probably more problems with that than there are that actually solves. And I think certainly in terms of small employers, it's maybe not the best. But I think actually, first of all, looking at what your absence level is, establishing that first of all, and then knowing when someone goes over or is heading to go over what you think is an acceptable rate of absence, and then actually tackling that, but also making it, always having, a self-certificate needs to be completed, a return to work interview always needs to happen so that people know that they can't just take a day off and then come back. Plus, it gives an opportunity of you to pick up on maybe some underlying reasons to cause a sickness absence, which can help you to actually maybe step in and support to actually prevent that becoming an even bigger issue.
Okay, Glenn, we've got time for one more, or we?
I think there's a couple more questions in the Q&A. I don't know if you're able to answer them in the chat, so that we can move on to the next item.
Yeah, fine. I can do that in the chat. Dawn and someone else as well. I'll pick up that and whiz it in the chat. No problem.
Right. So thank you to you both for that presentation. So yeah, a couple of questions there that Nigel will look to answer, because yes, we have to move on to our next item and then to our final speakers. So we're going to go on to the most exciting bit, arguably, of the presentation, is where I get to announce who the winners are of the virtual goodie bags. So you can see the prizes that were available appearing on your screen now. So the winner of the Citation, the winner of the £50 Amazon voucher provided by Citation is Donna Thresher from the Hullbridge Preschool. The winner of the £150 voucher for Hope is Jill Hayhoe from Watermead Day Nursery. The winner of the £50 John Lewis voucher from Christie & Co. is Lisa Hayton from the Old Bank Day Nursery. The winner of the free subscription to Widget is Heidi Hain from Nina's Nursery Preschool. And the final prize is the free membership for 1 year with the Institute of Early Years Education. The lucky winner is Kim Wilson from Honeypot Nursery Group. So congratulations to everybody. The exhibitors will be in touch with you to arrange the delivery of your prizes. At that point, I think we are ready to move on to our next speakers. I'll be handing over now to Jayne Coward and Wendy Ratcliffe from Ofsted. Please put any questions you have for them in the Q&A section, and we will try and pose as many of those questions as we can at the end of their presentation. So Jayne and Wendy, if you are ready, I'll pass over to you.
Welcome, Jayne and Wendy.
Hi, welcome. Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, absolutely fine.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. So just to introduce myself to everybody, my name's Jayne Coward, and I'm the Deputy Director for Early Years Regulatory Policy and Practice at Ofsted, and I'll let Wendy introduce herself before we move on to the slides.
Hi everybody, and thank you for having us this evening. My name's Wendy Ratcliffe. I'm one of His Majesty's Inspectors, and I'm also Ofsted's Principal Officer for our Early Education Policy.
Brilliant. Now, I'm not so technically minded, so I shall see if I can move on the slide now, but let's see. Bear with me. Someone needs to give me a tech teaching on how I move on the slide. Oh, there we go. Right. Excellent. We seem to be there now. Apologies. Now we're about 3 ahead, but never mind. So I wanted to start this evening with a quote from our Chief Inspector, which is a couple of slides back now, if we can. Oh, Wendy's in charge of this now. So I wanted to start the evening with a quote from Sir Martin Oliver, who is our Chief Inspector. And you can all read that. I won't read it for you, but what I hope it shows is the recognition of the importance of early years. And we really wanted to say from the start that we really recognise the incredibly difficult job that everybody on this call and everybody that works in early years do to support and care for and educate our youngest children. So we wanted to say a huge thank you for all your continuing hard work, all your dedication and professionalism. And I think taking the time and joining us this evening is testament to that willingness to do everything you can to care for, look after the children in your care. So again, a really huge thank you to start off with. So we wanted to start this evening by talking a little bit about the Big Listen, the feedback we received and what we're going to do in response to that. So just moving on to the next slide there. We wanted to, well, Sir Martin Oliver is really keen to make sure that Ofsted's a modern world-class inspectorate and regulator, that it's fit for purpose, and most importantly, that it's trusted by parents and carers, by children and learners, and by professionals like yourselves here on the call tonight that we work with. So the tragic death of Ruth Perry last year was a real catalyst for change, but the case for change, I think, had been building for much longer. We've got the legacy of the pandemic. We know that that had a huge impact on us as a society, but also a lasting impact on our children. And at the same time, I think education and care leaders became very frustrated by all the different burdens of accountability of which Ofsted was a part. So with Martin Oliver coming into his position in January, that gave us a real chance to reset our priorities, refine our practice and rebuild our relationships. And those are the key things that you can see there in the slide. So resetting our priorities, refining our practice and rebuilding our relationships. So a huge thank you to everyone who took part in the Big Listen. I'm sure lots of you on this call took the time to respond to what we were asking. It was the largest consultation in Ofsted's history and something that Sir Martin is very proud of. If you want to see the full report, that is obviously available online if anybody in the call hasn't had a chance to look at it. But what we're going to do is give you an overview of some of those core themes. We want you to know that we've listened, we want you to know that we've heard, and we want you to know that we will improve what we do. So the Big Listen document, for those of you who've looked at it, is quite huge. And so what we've tried to do is condense down what we've heard in that Big Listen into 7 core messages so that we can respond to those challenges that were put to us through the Big Listen. So we're calling those the 7 C's. So firstly, and most importantly, we want to put children and learners first. So throughout the responses to the Big Listen, there was strong support for our role as an independent inspectorate, particularly from those parents who responded to the report. We heard from parents and carers that children and learners should come first across all the work we do, across all our remits, and we absolutely agree with that. And I hope that you can see from the response that everything we do is rooted in that commitment and that everything we do has children at the heart of that. Secondly, we have care and well-being. Again, that we heard that inspectors should have more care and more concern for the well-being of the leaders and the staff that we inspect. And again, we've taken this on board. We will put into practice through all the changes we are setting out in our response to the Big Listen, from improving inspector training, including the mental health training. So we started that in January and we will continue that, and we will reform how we inspect. We also heard a criticism around the consistency of our inspections. We also heard our inspectors do not always have the expertise or experience in the specific type of providers they inspect, or they don't quite understand the context the provider is working in. So again, in our Big Listen response, we set out how changes to inspector recruitment and training will help this. Fourthly, we are looking at the content of our frameworks. So we want to ensure that they work as well as they can for specific providers and those specific remits that we inspect, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Fifth one was complaints. Again, we've heard criticism of how we handle complaints and the lack of openness. So again, we set out how we will work on improving transparency and our complaint handling processes, and we started to do some pilot panels to look at that in more detail. Sixth was constructive feedback and reporting. So we want our feedback to be constructive. We want reports to have recommendations for improvements, but we also want to make sure our reports are nuanced and give a clear assessment of quality. And we agree with what we've heard there, and we'll change our reporting to do this. And again, I'll talk about that a little later in these slides. And finally, I think we heard frustrations from many of the professionals we inspect about the consequences of single word judgments for overall effectiveness, and particularly the anxiety that they cause. And while some changes have been made already, we will continue to work with government around this particular aspect of it. So that's a bit of a summary. As I said, this was one of the largest consultations, or the largest consultation in Ofsted's history. So to give you a little bit of context, of the over 16,000 people who responded to the consultation, 51%, so just over half of the respondents, answered questions about early years, and that included over 700 from those employed in a registered childcare setting. Alongside that, we also had some independent commissioned research, which included 783 responses from parents and carers, and just over 1,500 responses from early years organisations. So early years did have a loud voice, as it should, in terms of our big list and responses. Moving on to think specifically about what we heard for early years. Parents told us that they want to know their children are safe and happy in their early years settings, and that is their priority for Ofsted inspections. They also want us to look at and check that children are being supported through their learning and that they're well prepared for school. There was the same frustrations for early years as other settings about the oversimplicity of the single word judgment for overall effectiveness. But in particular in the early years sector, there was an expression of concern over the potential consequences for ongoing funding and business viability, which was slightly different to other remits that we inspect. There was also some frustration around primary school inspections, not having the early years expertise needed to inspect nursery and reception phases. I think in the independent research, 61% of providers rated inspectors' level of knowledge and expertise as good, and 12% rated it as poor. And then finally, on this little summary, nearly 3/4 of practitioners wanted us to consider the local area of the setting, so context, so that we could understand the challenges that were faced and the context in which settings are caring for children, and the impact that that has, and the discussions we should have around that in terms of inspection. So in terms of what we're going to do, and these were the key actions that were set out within the Big Listen in the early years part of that, we said we'll reform our early years inspection and regulatory framework. So that's not rewriting it, that's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, that's around building on what's good about the current framework whilst addressing some of the areas which you have told us could be improved, particularly so that it's better suited and better reflects what we know about the early years remit. So the EYFS will remain at its heart. Obviously, we want to make sure providers secure the best start for the youngest children. And that framework will be informed through the views we've heard through the Big Listen, evidence from research that we've undertaken around best start in life. And Wendy will talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. Importantly, we'll also consult with the sector so that we can incorporate your views as well into this process. And we'll continue to put safeguarding, welfare and well-being of children above and beyond any other criteria around early years childcare settings. We know children learn best when they're happy and safe. You've heard lots of talk about the introduction of report cards and removal of over-effectiveness grades. So as you know, this has happened already in the school sector. Whilst it is coming for the early years sector, we didn't introduce that immediately because we know there's other things such as allocation of funding that are dependent on an overall effectiveness judgment at the minute, and it's right that we take time and have proper discussions so that we move that in the right direction. So we will work with DFE and are working with DFE on those issues. And I think that reflects what parents, carers and professionals told us what matter most to them. We'll also consult on report cards as well later in this academic year. We've also talked about the Ofsted Academy, and that links to improving training for inspectors. So the Academy will help us transform how we recruit, train and develop all our staff, including improving our recruitment of inspectors from the early years sector. And finally, We want to support the government's plans to meet the demand for childcare places in whatever way we can, including through our insights, through looking at our registration process, etc. In terms of insights, in terms of using those insights to drive improvements in the early years sector, we will develop an area insight service that will visualize local area data so that we can use this oversight, if you like, to inform the work that we do. So our Childcare at Deserts Oases project will map how childcare provision is distributed nationally and help those responsible for growing the sector to target their efforts and resources towards the areas most in need. And then this autumn, we'll also publish the third part of our Best Start in Life, and we'll train inspectors to use these findings so that they can inform future improvements to our inspection frameworks. And as I said, Wendy's going to tell you a little bit more about that later in the presentation. And then finally, we set out commitment to having a single point of contact, and that will just make sure that we carefully consider the context, the needs and the voice of the sector when we're creating policies and in all our decision making. So my final slide moves on to the last few actions, again, that are set out in the big listen. One around reviewing how we inspect, regulate and register multiple providers. And again, that will involve working with the DfE to amend legislation so that we can look at regulating and inspecting multiple group-owned early years providers and enable us to have regulatory oversight of those providers. And then finally, we want to review the legislation relating to childcare register, particularly around fraud in the childcare system. And again, we'll be working closely with colleagues in DfE on looking into that. So a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I hope that gives you a bit of a flavour of what the big listen responses and the actions we're going to take in relation to early years. And I'll hand you over to Wendy.
Brilliant, thank you, Jane. That was quite a lot there to get through, wasn't it? But I think it's really important that we share those findings. So I'm just going to give you a bit of some updates about some of our upcoming research that we're going to be publishing, as well as some updates that we've made to inspection handbooks, and also tell you a little bit about some of our resources that are available for you. So let's start by thinking about, I'm going too fast on these slides. Okay, there we go. That's the one we need. So yes, to start with then, Jane just mentioned our research, and I want to let you know a little bit more about this. So here at Ofsted, we've undertaken research in line with our strategic priority of getting children off to the best possible start. And as part of that strategic priority, we focused in on some of that research, our research on birth to 4. And that's because previously, some people will remember that back in 2017, we published research on reception provision in that report called Bold Beginnings. And in some of our schools research that we've done over time since introducing the education inspection framework, we also refer to reception age children. So that's why the Best Start in Life research review focuses in on the learning and development of children from birth to 4. And our other research that is coming out shortly as well, which is into reception and Key Stage 1, which is strong foundations in the first years of school. That also is coming out shortly. And this considers the barriers to learning for pupils in early years and Key Stage 1. It explores the importance of securing foundational knowledge and includes examples of strong practice that Ofsted found during research visits to 20 reception classes. It highlights common issues and makes recommendations for schools as they consider how they can make sure that all children get that best possible start. So let's just think about our Best Start in Life research review. So hot off the press, next week, we will publish the third and final part of this research review series. And this evening is just a very quick opportunity for us to revisit the 3 parts of this research. And it's always good to be in sessions such as this with early years experts. So before I provide that summary of our research, I think it's important for us to acknowledge that there isn't necessarily anything you don't know already within that research. But what we're hoping is that by us saying it, we hope it gives you that reassurance that Ofsted isn't looking for anything different. Because if you're doing what's right for your children in your context, then you're doing what's right for Ofsted. So part one, in part one, we examined the factors that contribute to a high quality education in the early years. It considered the early years context, staffing, the curriculum, and pedagogy. It also set out the principles behind the research review series, building on the research that we did for our education inspection framework. And then in part two looked at the factors that contribute to developing young children's knowledge and skills in those three prime areas of learning in the DfE's early years foundation stage. And then coming next week on the 8th, part three will explore the 4 specific areas of learning. And of course, we all know that these are literacy, mathematics, understanding the world, and expressive arts and design. And these areas of learning provide much of that foundational knowledge that children go on to use as they progress through their education. So if we just think about an overview of part three now. So this slide sets out the first three main findings from the research review. And you won't be surprised by this. The specific areas of learning are connected, and they give the context for much learning in the prime areas. Learning in the specific areas should prioritise vocabulary and language comprehension. It should give children opportunities to develop their executive function. And to deliver high quality curriculum in settings, we need to know about how young children develop and learn. We need to have a clear understanding of the possible next steps in children's development and learning, and need to know how to teach young children and how to assess their learning. And this requires ongoing guidance and professional development. All children need a fair opportunity to learn. The quality of the curriculum is important, and it's especially important for children who have less help at home with their early learning. And this is where we can make the greatest difference to a child's development and ensure that they are given that very best start in life. So let's just have a quick look at some of the conclusions, the overall conclusions from the Best Start research review. The research is clear about the importance of early education, but we know early education is not a level playing field. Early education is not compulsory for children before reception year, and children will have different patterns of attendance. Some may attend every day, year round, others just 3 mornings. So some children will experience less of the curriculum because they're attending fewer sessions, and potentially this can have a direct impact on children's learning. We also know that funding is not a level playing field. Some settings may be better resourced in terms of money, staff, time, support than others. And some children get more help at home than others. And we need to consider how this impacts not only on children's early years experiences, but also on their future educational success. Given these potential discrepancies, it's all the more important that we consider the impact of the curriculum on each child and prioritise what each child needs most when they are in attendance at their early years setting, because what you do can make all that difference. As our Chief Inspector has said, if we get it right for vulnerable children, we'll get it right for all children. So please do look out for that research review, which will be published on Tuesday next week. Okay, let's just move on then to have a quick look at some of the recent changes we've made to the Early Years Inspection Handbook. And we published these changes back in, I say back in September, we are in October now, aren't we? So last month we published these changes. They're very minor, and there is a summary of changes on the website as well. So these changes include, we've amended the references to funding in our handbook, specific to just to specify that the funding, when we're referring to funding on our handbook, this refers to the funded places for disadvantaged children. We just want to make that explicitly clear in the handbook, given that now many children are in receipt of funding. So with the expansion of funding entitlements, most children will be receiving some kind of funding, but our inspectors will want to be knowing about what it is that providers are doing to support disadvantaged children. So thinking about children in receipt of funding for disadvantaged 2-year-olds, and also EYPP, and also Disability Access Fund. So we just wanted to make sure that that was explicitly clear. Moving on too fast. Okay, and then we also, and this is something that Jayne has already spoken about in terms of output from the Big Listen, we've also wanted to make context clearer as well. So it's really important that we consider the different context of providers and what they're doing in response to those children that they've got in their settings. So we've just added a bit more information there. And then on the next slide, it just covers a couple more of the updates. We've simplified, for example, the wording in the first bullet of the grade descriptors for the quality of education, because we had ambitious and ambitions in the same bullet point. So just some very minor changes there. And we've also clarified around when a provider can contact Ofsted following an inspection. Okay, let's move on to just reminding colleagues about some of the resources that we've got available here at Ofsted for you. I think the first resource in terms of thinking about, we quite often get the question about how can I best prepare for my inspection? We would say do nothing to prepare for your inspection, because do what you do every day, because we want to find out what it's like to be a child at your early years setting. However, please do read the Early Years Inspection Handbook, because that is there for you as well as our inspectors. We don't have any secret guidance. What inspectors do on inspection is published in the handbook, so it's there for you. However, we have also produced some guidance for early years and practitioners, and also for parents. So if you scan that QR code, it will take you to a range of resources that we have around early years. So it will take you to some parent guides that are there. So how Ofsted inspects childminders, how Ofsted inspects your nursery. There is also a page around frequently asked questions that we get. So what EY providers and practitioners need to know. And then finally, there is a YouTube channel, the Ofsted YouTube channel that has a couple of different playlists. There's a playlist there with the FAQs for providers and practitioners, and you can see there Sam in my team, she's got there's several short videos there in terms of things like what to expect from the learning walk. So they're very short, they're just a couple of minutes long. And interestingly, we were at the expo in Coventry. I know Purnima mentioned that earlier in the session. We were there on Friday and Saturday, and we were hearing from some nursery managers, for example, that they've used some of those short clips in their staff meetings as a way of helping to reassure their staff about what to expect from an Ofsted inspection, because we know it causes and people become anxious about it, and we want to dispel some of that anxiety as well. So have a scan of that code and it will take you to a range of useful resources. Well, we hope they're useful for you. Okay, and that's us. So I think we have a few moments for questions, if there are any.
Thank you, Jayne and Wendy. I think there are a couple of questions about report cards. What was that going to be the case for early years as well moving forward?
Yeah, just some clarification. Yes, we will be removing the single word judgment, and yes, we will be moving to a report card. We just didn't do it at the same time as schools because we just needed a bit of time to work through the process and mechanics of that and links to funding and work through that with DFE. So
I think what's important to say as well, and as we work through those things, come early next year, we're aiming to be able to be in a position to consult on what that looks like, so that you get to have that say as well.
So when will that consultation will be coming out roughly?
It will be it will be in the spring.
In the spring, okay. And the new system of report cards will be kind of established by September next year?
We are, as we say, we're working with DFE on those timelines and we'll be out and consult in the spring, with the aim to hopefully bring that in next year at some point.
Just one point about the fraud issue. Nikki just put in the chat, they're a bit puzzled about the fraud in early years. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that, please, what that means?
So it's linked to the general childcare register and claiming different funding streams. So we're working with Student Loan Company and DFE on looking at that in terms of the general childcare register.
Okay. And again, I think it just there's lots of changes and coming on, not only from Ofsted perspective, but also in terms of the DFE policies as well. So just so that everybody knows, I am on the Early Years and Social Care Reference Group, Ofsted Reference Group. I represent the early years sector on that group. And also we have the regular meetings with Ofsted as well as part of the Early Years and Childcare Forum that, any questions anybody has, we always take that up to that forum as well to highlight some of these issues. So has anybody got any more questions? And thank you everybody for hanging on until later, 6 o'clock nearly today. But any more questions?
There is another one from Philip Siddell in the Q&A there, Purnima, and one from Michelle about requesting advice from Ofsted as well.
Yeah.
So sorry, do you want me to read that?
Yes, sorry, I can't see them.
I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat at the same time, and someone's just asking if you could put the slide that had the QR code. If you could go back a slide so that's one of the delegates can scan that again, that would be great. Michelle has made the observation that she's not been able to get clarification on the EYFS wording of requirements or ask advice, as a recent Ofsted inspector has told that they are not there to offer advice and answer questions. I don't know if you want to respond to that one.
I can do if you want. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's probably I think we aim to do good as we go in terms of our inspections. I think there was a dividing of responsibilities in terms of local authority providing advice and guidance and Ofsted doing the inspection and regulation back in 2000, whenever it is, but we would hope to do good as we go and have conversations as we go in terms of where we can help. But I think that maybe sometimes relates to that distribution of responsibilities, but we do try to help and have helpful conversations as part of our inspection process.
And there is always our inquiries email to, people can email in. And I also think one of the things, having mentioned things like Expo, we're doing what we can to be at various events as well, so that there are those opportunities for people to have conversations with an inspector outside of inspection, because we hear that that's something that people appreciate.
Great, thanks. I think there's just one final observation from Philip Siddell in there. I think it's more about how an Ofsted inspection will affect the income, basically, because the government is the major customer in the future. So I'll ask that, Purnima, for you to take away to your the groups that you sit on, the necessary question for Ofsted.
No, but I think we can take it away to conversations with DFE and partners for sure. I think one thing that would just be good to say though, Purnima, is that as you say, there is a lot of change afoot, ahead, and from government, from Ofsted. But one of the things we just want to do is kind of reassure colleagues on the call that actually, as Jayne said earlier, we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and we will make sure that any change that comes is really clear, and that we consult along the way. And I think ultimately, if you're doing what's right for your children in the context in which you're working, then you're doing what's right for Ofsted, and that won't change.
Okay, if we're okay, I think we're at the point where we just need to ask some quick feedback from our members of what they've thought of the event. So thank you to Jayne and Wendy for that. If you're able to fill in the form, answer the questionnaire, sorry, has this event made you feel more informed about the latest developments in the sector? I'll give you a second to respond to that. It helps us plan for future events. If you've got any other comments about topics that you would like to see or speakers you'd like to hear from at these events, please put your comments in the chat for us there. That we much appreciate that. And then finally, I'll hand over to Purnima to close the event.
Thank you very much, Glenn, and thank you, Jayne and Wendy as well. And as I said earlier on, there are an awful lot of changes that are going to be coming as part of the kind of manifesto promises by the new government. And I am meeting regularly with Bridget Phillipson and with Stephen Morgan. Bridget Phillipson just announced another big communication event and asking everybody to join that webinar. So we will put that out in the member bulletin as well for you. And please keep a note on keep an eye on your emails coming from NDNA. Like I said, there's an awful lot of things going on. And as and when we come with any issues or challenges and anything new, we will keep you posted. But please check your emails and check the calendar and the NDNA website as well. Thank you very much for all our sponsors, Christian Go, Citation, and everybody else, all the exhibitors who actually exhibited today. But most importantly, for all of you for joining. I know it's the end of the day and you're all busy and tired after doing that wonderful work that you always do and educating young children and caring for them. So thank you very much from all of you for joining today, and have a nice evening, and we'll catch up soon. Thank you.